I'm the new PR for Canada, and that makes me the new chair of the PBC. So this is my first meeting. I ask you to forgive beginners' mistakes. I hope I don't offend any of you. But I think the work is very important, and I'm really looking forward. I just spoke to our Minister of Foreign Affairs before this call for about an hour, and I told him about the importance of peace building and peacemaking as well as peacekeeping. So he's very strongly committed to it. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes, if I may. Nothing you wouldn't expect. We'll be recording the meeting and we'll be posting the video on the PBSO website for observers. I'd like to remind all of you to sign in with your name and mission affiliation. And this is a key point because of sound interference, to keep your microphone on mute. Keep your microphone on mute. Somebody just mute your phone if you can. It helps us to get things going. Once the briefers have concluded their presentations, we will open the floor to member states. The speakers list is now open, and I would ask you all to use the chat function on Zoom to request the floor. We will be building the speakers list on the basis of protocol and requests for the floor, but we will be giving preferences to the countries from the region first, and then others can join in. Now, we have a very large number of speakers for this meeting and a large number of participants and a large number of briefers. So I would like to remind you to the briefers to limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes, 5 minutes for the briefers and 3 minutes for interveners. The purpose of this meeting, as you know, is to take a closer look at the impact of COVID-19 on the peace building and sustaining peace work that we've been doing in the Lake Chad Basin. This meeting builds very much on the discussions that you've already had on COVID-19 and of course on previous PBC discussions on Lake Chad, including a segment of last year's annual session. But it also marks the first dedicated discussion in the Peace Building Commission on the peace building challenges in the Lake Chad Basin. We want to get a better sense of the challenges, the priorities, and how much more there is to do. So don't hold back. Let us know exactly what the situation is. We need to know what international support is required to assist the countries in the region to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on the gains that we've made and to maintain the path towards sustainable peace and development. And this discussion is obviously timely because there will be an open debate on Security Council scheduled for the 17th of September under the presidency of Niger on the security and humanitarian situation in the Lake Chad Basin. Excellence, dear colleagues, we have several distinguished briefers, and I'd like to introduce them to you. We're particularly grateful that the special representatives of the Secretary General for both Central and West Africa are joining us, which I think is a first for the PBC. We're going to be hearing from the special representative of the UN SecGen for Central Africa, Mr. Francois Luceni Faye, followed by the special representative of the UN Secretary General for West Africa and the Sahel, Dr. Mohamed Ibn Shamba. Next, we will hear from the Executive Secretary of the Lake Basin Commission, His Excellency Mr. Maman Nuhu. Next will be a briefing by the EU Special Representative, His Excellency Angel Losada Fernandez. Next will be a briefing by Dr. Fatima Akilu, the Executive Director of the NEEM Foundation. Following Dr. Akilu, we'll hear from the UNDP Assistant Administrator, Ms. Ahuna Eziakanwa. And last but not least, of course, we'll hear from Mr. Oscar Fernandez Taranco, the SG for Peacebuilding Support. So I'd like to once again say to the briefers, please keep it to 5 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's my pleasure to ask our first speaker, Mr. Francois Luceni Faye, to begin the discussion. If I may, Francois, allez-y.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished member of the Peace Building Commission, Mr. Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, Mr. Special Representative for the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin of the European Union, dear colleagues and partners, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to address you today on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on peace building and sustaining peace in the Lake Chad Basin. I'm also happy to brief you alongside my colleagues Mohamed Ibn Chambas, Oscar Fernandez Tarancon, and Aouna Ezia Konwa, as well as our main partners in the region, the Lake Basin Commission, LCBC, which is represented here by its Executive Secretary, Ambassador Mahman Nuhu. The presence of another key partner, the European Union, represented by my friend, Ambassador Angel Losada Fernandez, is also much appreciated. This briefing provides an opportunity to assess the impact of the COVID-19 on the Lake Chad Basin region and mobilize support to address it. The briefing also allows to keep the region on top of the international agenda at a time when the pandemic continues to monopolize attention. As a matter of fact, let me say it from the onset. Over the last few months, the pandemic has exacerbated the challenges faced by the Lake Chad Basin. COVID-19 hit the Lake Chad Basin in March. All the 4 riparian countries around Lake Chad have reported cases of COVID-19 infection, including Cameroon and Chad, that are under the purview of INOCA. The Boko Haram affected areas in these countries are also hit by the pandemic, even though statistics there show a relatively lower number of cases compared to other parts of these countries. With the support of partners, including relevant UN entities, especially WHO, which has been providing a valuable technical assistance, these countries have thus far managed to contain the pandemic by implementing timely and efficient measures. These measures involve restrictions impacting the exercise of some social and economic rights, as well as civil and political rights, including movement restriction within capital and between regions, restriction to businesses, and the closing of borders, among others. The prevailing situation shows that the health crisis has important socio-economic and political costs. Among others, economic activities have shut down, affecting mostly small businesses and the informal sector on which large sections of the populations depend for their living. Politically, the COVID-19 pandemic was put forward as one of the reasons for postponing elections or to explain the low turnout during revision of electoral registers. The area affected by Boko Haram were already isolated from the other parts of the countries of the region due to several factors, including their homelessness, the insecurity resulting from terrorist activities, and measures imposed by the governments as part of their counter-insurgency strategy. The counter-insurgency restrictive measures remain in force alongside those imposed to counter the spread of COVID-19. Distinguished members of the Peace Building Commission, many populations in Lake Chad Basin who have lost their means of subsistence or were forced to flee their homes depends on humanitarian assistance for their survival. If restrictive measures warranted by the fight against COVID-19 were to affect humanitarian activities, this would have an adverse effect on the lives of the populations in need of humanitarian assistance, including the most vulnerable, especially women, youth, elderly persons, and disabled persons. I would like to join my voice to our colleagues' call for greater coordination between the beneficiaries, the humanitarian community, and the national and local authorities in order to identify timely and adequate measures to contain the spread of the virus, while also allowing the unhindered continuation of humanitarian activities. The cross-border impact of the virus represents another major challenge in the Lake Chad Basin. Indeed, the limited state control over porous borders between the countries and the frequent cross-border movement of population and insurgents could facilitate the spread of the virus, requiring better coordination between the concerned countries. If COVID-19 responses are not properly coordinated, populations are likely to move across national borders to seek better health and socioeconomic care, and could do everything possible to circumvent the respective measures put in place by the countries. This would in turn increase the risk of the spread of COVID-19 between countries. Therefore, the Lake Chad Basin countries could consider developing a regional response to the COVID-19 pandemic with the support of international partners. Such as response should be crafted in synergy with the strategy put in place by the regional economic communities to which these countries belong, namely the Economic Community of Central African States, ECAS, and the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. The Lake Chad Basin Commission should work closely with ECAS and ECOWAS in this regard. The regional response should put emphasis on areas not covered by other plans to reinforce cooperation, coordination, and complementarity between national and regional strategies. The plan should be linked to the regional strategy for the stabilization, recovery, and resilience of Boko Haram affected area of the Lake Chad Basin region, RSS, and could use the frameworks established to support the implementation of the letter. Should the concerned states agree to move forward with the development and implementation of the regional plan, I would strongly encourage the PBC to support it. As the COVID-19 continues to spread in the Lake Chad region, terrorist attacks and counter-insurgency operations are increasing, especially since the beginning of this year, resulting in thousands of casualties. Despite the call launched by the Secretary General in March for a global ceasefire, terrorist attacks and military operations continue in the region, thus hindering the implementation of measures to contain the spread of COVID-19. UNOCA will continue to advocate for a temporary cessation of hostilities to facilitate COVID-19 response in the Lake Chad Basin in line with the Secretary General's call. Recent increase in terrorist attacks, including against civilian and camp of localities hosting internally displaced persons, military operation, as well as, in some instances, decision by the authorities to relocate population from certain areas to facilitate such operation are creating more displacement. The situation increases the risk of spreading the virus. Given the poor quality and limited number of healthcare facilities and resources in the area affected by Boko Haram, we need to support adequate sensitization in prevention by national and local authorities. Overall, persistent insecurity is making it very difficult to implement a holistic approach aimed at addressing the root causes of the multinational crisis facing the region, including by causing delays in the implementation of the RSS. But I cannot overstate the fact that so far, the RSS is our best way out of this crisis, and we should all join efforts to make it a reality for the population living in the Lake Chad Basin. I would therefore like to reiterate the full participation and support of INOCA to the implementation of the RSS. Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the Peace Building Commission, a combination of the COVID-19 crisis, the restrictive measures imposed to curb its spread, and persisting insecurity relating to terrorist attacks threatens to reverse the gain achieved in terms of peace building and sustaining peace in Lake Chad Basin. In those circumstances, allow me here to acknowledge the particular attention that the Peace Building Commission has been paying to the situation in the Lake Chad Basin region, as evidenced by the current session. I also appreciate the concrete support that the PBC and the Peace Building Fund, PBF, have been providing to the Lake Chad Basin countries, including through the financing at projects which have had a positive impact on the lives of the population and on peace and security in the region. It is important that these projects are based on national ownership and effectively help improve local livelihoods, including through a catalytic peace building effect. The Peace Building Fund has supported or is supporting several completed or ongoing projects in the countries of the region. Some of these projects aim at strengthening the participation of women and youth in conflict prevention and resolution initiative, crisis resolution, peace building, and the promotion of a culture of peace. Others contribute to the coordinate and tangible improvement of the living condition of communities, or reduce conflict over the use of natural resources. Still others promote inclusive approaches to build resilience to climate change, improve management of transhumance, the strengthening of local governance in the context of increased migration, the creation of early warning mechanisms to prevent conflict and violent extremism, and the participation of women and youth and young people in decision-making processes. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the PVF quickly adjusted its portfolio to integrate elements of awareness raising on the symptom, risk, and protective measures against COVID-19, as well as the prevention of the spread of fake news around the disease. With the prevailing health crisis, these kinds of investment are needed to support government and local communities in the Lake Chad Basin in containing the spread of COVID-19 and addressing its impact on peace building and sustaining peace. In so doing, particular attention should be given to the most vulnerable groups, especially women and youth. Their specific needs should be identified and met in the particularity manners. I will also use the PBC and the PBF to the extent allowed by the rules and procedures to continue to give due consideration to cross-border initiatives, including supporting projects and programs within the framework of the RSS and other regional strategies and plans. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Francois, for your presentation. It's a good beginning to a complex topic, and I'll turn right away to the other special representative, Mohammed Shambas. Mohammed? You there? Maybe, is he there?
He's there, but there is no audio.
He's muted.
No audio. Muted. You're muted, I think, Mohammed. You're muted.
He's not, but it doesn't work.
We may have technical difficulties. So I think what we'll do, Mohammed, if you'll permit me, we'll now have the Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, Mama Nuhu, who can talk to us. And we'll come back to you, Mohammed. We'll try to see if we can find a way to fix your problem.
Thank you very much. The chair of the Peace Building Commission, the special representative of the UN Secretary General for Central Africa, the special representative of the UN Secretary General for West Africa and the Sahel, the European Union Special Representative for the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin, the UNDP Assistant Administrator and Director of the Regional Bureau for Africa, the UN Assistant Secretary General for Peace Building Support. The Lake Chad Basin region has been experiencing a succession of daunting challenges, the ongoing COVID-19 being the latest. The area has suffered decades of neglect in terms of development compared to other parts of the 4 Lake Chad riparian countries. Impacted by climate change and the resultant environmental degradation, drought, desert encroachment, and shrinking of the lake. Meanwhile, the population has multiplied from 7 million in the 1960s to about 45 million today, resulting in massive emigration of the people from the rural areas to the few urban areas in search of green opportunities. It was against this background that the Boko Haram insurgency started becoming more intense as from 2014, leading to the destruction of almost all government facilities, followed by forced displacement of the remaining people who have not been forcefully conscripted by the terrorists. There are about 2,832,939 internally displaced persons in the 4 affected countries as of 31st August 2020. There are also 298,426 refugees in 3 of the affected countries. While this is going on, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived to make a bad situation even worse. Member countries adopted various strategies in response to the pandemic, including lockdown of whole communities, ban on intercity travels, and closure of borders. Of all the measures adopted, however, lockdown of whole communities and closure of borders have had the most serious effect on the livelihoods of the people. The economies of member countries also recorded heavy losses as a result of the suspension of all economic activities. Their lean resources were further depleted on the provision of emergency medical support and food items as palliatives to the most vulnerable people, make it impossible for the governments to meet their budgetary obligations. On the instructions of member countries, the Lake Chad Basin Commission has just slashed its operational budget by 50% because member countries cannot pay their assessed contributions. This has affected the Commission's ability to implement its projects, including its emergency program for women, the youth, and other vulnerable members of the communities. At individual levels, the economic downturn has led to the loss of daily incomes and means of livelihood, especially among the majority daily paid workers who live from hand to mouth with no savings to fall back to. The security implications of this scenario are not unexpected. as frustration and restiveness ensued, especially among the youth, it is feared that this would make them more vulnerable to recruitment and radicalization to swell the ranks of Boko Haram and other terrorist groups. They could also be available to other criminal activities like kidnapping for ransom, cattle rustling, armed robbery, burglary. In some member countries, there has been an unprecedented rise in incidents of rape and other gender-based violence. What are the solutions? Mr. Chair, the sequence of challenges compel the design of more durable, resilience-building, medium-term and long-term solutions to address the root causes of fragility among the people. The Lake Chad Basin Commission and its partners already have a number of projects which more than ever before need the support of partners to implement. A regional strategy for the stabilization, recovery, and resilience of Boko Haram affected areas of the Lake Chad Basin has been produced by the Lake Chad Basin Commission with the support of the African Union Commission and the UNDP to not only provide immediate support to the affected people, but to progress towards addressing the root causes of the crisis in the Lake Chad Basin region. It is a foundational strategy for coordinated efforts by the international partners and the national and local authorities across the 4 countries to tackle the fragility drivers of the Lake Chad region. It has a lifespan of 5 years in the first instance. The 9 all-encompassing pillars of intervention and 40 strategic objectives of the strategy include political cooperation, security and human rights, disarmament, demobilization, rehabilitation, reinsertion, and reintegration of persons affected by Boko Haram crisis, humanitarian assistance, governance and social contract, socioeconomic recovery and environmental sustainability, education, learning and skills, prevention of violent extremism and building peace, and the empowerment and inclusion of women and youth. We are at the level of producing a territorial action plan by the governors of 8 affected provinces. The action plans will be costed, and thereafter we will appeal to the international community for assistance to implement them. The regional stabilization strategy can be downloaded from the website of the Lake Chad Basin Commission on www.cblt.org. Meanwhile, the UNDP has spearheaded the establishment of a regional stabilization facility, a multi-donor basket fund seeking to mobilize funding for an estimated budget of $100 million to carry out the most urgent stabilization interventions in the affected communities in Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. These interventions are focusing on 3 of the 9 pillars of the regional stabilization strategy. Chair, a longer-term project is, however, needed to build resilience among the people and to restore their ability to fund for themselves. That is what we are undertaking through a project to improve the hydraulic capacity of the lake and its tributaries. We are at the point of recruiting a consultant to carry out an in-depth feasibility study of the project, which involves desilting strategic parts of the main tributaries of the lake and embankment stabilization, desilting the lake itself, and removing invasive weeds from the lake to enable it to receive more water from the tributaries. This is expected to inject an additional 0.4 meters to 1 meter of water into the lake which will enable the farmers, fishermen, and herders to resume their economic activities and take charge of their means of livelihood. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that the challenges facing the Lake Chad Basin are enormous, requiring the full support of the international community to enable the affected people get out of the cycle of poverty, misery, and violence. I therefore appeal to the international community to provide financial support to the Lake Chad Basin Commission member countries to enable them cope with the current economic downturn. To also support the Lake Chad Basin Commission's regional stabilization strategy to coordinate and streamline the projects designed to tackle fragility in the region and launch it on the path of development. And in view of the implementation delays occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, I appeal for the injection of more funds into the regional stabilization facility and the extension of its lifespan beyond 18 months. Finally, I would like to once again thank the Peace Building Commission for giving the Lake Chad Basin Commission the opportunity to present the COVID-19 and other challenges confronting the Lake Chad region. I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much to you, Mr. Nuhu, for that good summary of a very serious situation. Now, Mohammed, are you back now, or can we connect to Mohammed Shambas? Are you there?
Yeah, yes, I hope you can hear me this time around.
We can hear you loud and clear. We're glad to hear from you.
Very good, very good. Just ignore the name there, and which may be showing is a colleague who has been kind to allow me to use her laptop. So Ambassador Rai, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to New York and to wish you a very successful tour of duty as permanent representative of Canada. Thank you for convening this important meeting. Excellencies, members of the Peace Building Commission, Executive Secretary Mama Nuhu, it's always a pleasure to see you and to hear from you. My good friend Angel Losada, EU Special Representative for Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin, and my colleagues, SRSG Fal, ASG Toranko, ASG Ahura, looking forward to hearing from you. The pandemic has not spared West Africa and Sahel, nor the Lake Chad Basin for that matter. While primarily an acute health crisis, the impact of COVID-19 has been multidimensional. It is questioning government models and their effectiveness, disrupting supply chains, draining and starving states of much needed resources, and ultimately causing endless and profound hardships, especially to the most vulnerable among us, notably women and children. This forum, therefore, gives room for optimism and reminds us of the need to renew our collective engagement in tackling the root causes of instability in the Lake Chad Basin while mitigating and addressing the impact of COVID-19 on the region. As we have just heard from Executive Secretary Mama Nuhu, the COVID-19 pandemic remains a major challenge to the countries in the Lake Chad Basin, despite their consistent and collective efforts. Figures from relevant national entities highlight the need for continued complementary support to local authorities to enhance their capacity in containing the virus. Taking the economic impact as one indicator, declining revenue streams, increased budget deficits, limited capacity to deliver essential services, disruptions to governance processes may be more consequential to Boko Haram affected areas. And the Executive Secretary has just told us that he has been obliged now to cut the budget of his secretariat by as much as 50%. Meanwhile, the security situation in the Lake Chad Basin is still characterized by systemic attacks by insurgents against civilians and security forces on the one hand, and counterterrorism operations on the other, with significant implications for the protection of civilians, especially women and children. In fact, the call for ceasefire by Secretary General has not been heeded in the Lake Chad Basin. Prior to the pandemic, the humanitarian situation in Lake Chad Basin was dire and remains so to date. According to OCHA, in the northeast of Nigeria, the number of people in need of urgent assistance rose from 7.9 million at the beginning of 2020 to 10.6 million in June 2020. While Nigeria's overall humanitarian response plan would require more than $1 billion US, it is currently only funded by $355 million US, accounting for only 33% of the needed budget. Moreover, attacks on the humanitarian targets have compromised operations and limited access to vulnerable communities. There are genuine concerns that humanitarian assistance may wane as focus is now on combating the pandemic, which will worsen the humanitarian situation in Boko Haram affected areas. As we meet today, we must reassure the population of these areas of our collective commitment to sustain and scale up efforts to improve their lives. Reports of human rights violations during operations, especially involving women and children, are of major concern and may be counterproductive to the overall strategic goal of defeating the insurgents. Equally important is the need to adopt a human rights-based approach in strategies to combat the pandemic, both nationally and in Boko Haram affected areas as a whole. It is important to stress that the pandemic has had a chilling effect on bilateral and multilateral engagements essential for coordination, advocacy, and the implementation of strategic interventions in the Lake Chad Basin. For instance, the Forum of Governors from the respected affected regions, a key coordination and consultative platform, has been delayed. Likewise, some key joint activities of UNOCA and UNOWAS meant to enhance engagement with the LCBC Secretariat. I would like to underscore that UNOWAS and UNOCA have been leveraging their political mandates to support ongoing processes within the Lake Chad Basin, including enhancing the strategic partnerships with LCBC. In this regard, on 4th March, I facilitated exchanges between Ambassador Nuhu Mahama and the Regional United Nations Sustainable Development Group, which brought together the regional directors of UN entities in Dakar to discuss issues of common concern with the LCBC, enhance their role in the implementation of the Regional Stabilization Strategy for the Lake Chad Basin, the RSS, and to promote synergies between the RSS and the United Nations Integrated Strategy for the Sahel units. Permit me to appreciate the support provided by the PBSO and the Trust Fund for Human Security to the interagency initiative by UNCT Nigeria in addressing the farmers-herders conflict in the Middle Belt and surrounding states, a crisis which has direct linkages with climate change and environmental degradation in the Lake Chad Basin. I would like also to recognize the support of the PBF to Niger and ongoing plans to provide additional support to Nigeria. The assistance to Niger has been key in supporting cross-border projects and in addressing conflict drivers in Diffa and Tillaberi regions. In that regard, I am currently, in fact, in Niamey in the context of meetings regarding the preparations towards December's general elections. And I just had very fruitful briefings from the coordinator of the High Authority for Consolidation of Peace in Nigeria, in Niger, who has briefed us about the support from PBF, which has helped in permitting the registration of IDPs in both Diffa and the Tillaberi area, and also the support that this kind of funding is helping to give the Nigerian authorities to exercise control over their territory, particularly in ensuring that local leaders remain in place to give confidence to the population which have been coming under attack. Similarly, UNOWAS will be advocating for linkages between the RSS and the ECOWAS Priority Plan of Action 2020-2024 for the eradication of terrorism, which may be important in widening the impact of both frameworks. Your Excellencies, before I conclude, permit me to share a few thoughts on how we could maintain traction and maximize the investments we're making in the Lake Chad Basin, especially against the backdrop of COVID-19. Firstly, and as stressed by the Secretary General, international solidarity is essential to addressing this pandemic. This is also true for the Lake Chad Basin. Support to the RSS, which remains the most viable platform to comprehensively address the challenges in the region, must be sustained and made predictable. The PBC should continue to drive and catalyze support in this regard. Secondly, through the leadership of Secretary General, the UN has adopted a whole of the UN approach in supporting countries in the Lake Chad Basin to also adopt a whole of government approach in addressing the pandemic. This holistic approach will be extremely relevant in Boko Haram affected areas, as it will strengthen cooperation between all stakeholders, including and ultimately maximize results. Thirdly, as we have severally noted, military operations are necessary but not sufficient in addressing the root causes and other dimensions of the challenges in the Lake Chad Basin. While coordination between security forces, especially within multinational joint task force, remains key, collaboration with humanitarian and development partners is equally paramount. Fourthly, interlinkages between the RSS and units are crucial in addressing cross-regional threats. Fifth, it is important to underline that the reopening of borders will require sufficient coordination between states in the Lake Chad Basin in order to mitigate the likelihood of further transmission, while at the same time addressing potential security risks. And finally, we must continue to advocate for a human rights-based approach in the response to the pandemic and to ensure that women and other vulnerable groups are placed at the center of all decision-making in this regard. I thank you, Your Excellencies, for your attention Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Wright. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Special Representative. We really appreciate your leadership in this. I think you've given us a good call to action that we'll have to keep working on very hard. We're now going to hear from Angel Losada Fernandez, who's a Special Representative of the European Union.
Yes, thank you. Excellency, Your Excellency, Chair of the Peace Building Commission, Bob Wright, Your Excellencies and very good friends, SSRG François Fall and SSRG Mohamed Chambas, Your Excellency Ambassador Nuhu, Your Excellency also Assistant Secretary General Oscar Fernandez Tarranco, Excellencies, Ambassadors, dear and distinguished participants. First, allow me to thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the European Union at this United Nations Peace Building Commission. I feel really very honored to participate once again, actually, in this forum, and now, as our President said, in a very timely moment when we have crises all around the area, unfortunately. That's why it's so important to have this kind of meeting today. It's very timely in this aspect. But as you know, the European Union remains strongly committed to the Lake Chad Basin region, more so as the security situation deteriorates and the humanitarian crisis worsens, as has been very well explained before. This 10-year-long crisis is the product of a complex combination of factors, well explained as I said, such as extreme poverty and underdevelopment, bad governance, and marginalization of local communities, as well as climate change and other drivers of violent conflicts. Such a complex crisis requires, of course, an integrated approach. Thus, our action covers security as well as humanitarian assistance, development, and of course, I will have to add political and diplomatic action, which is very necessary at this precise moment, as Dr. Chambas knows very well, who has been playing an important role also now in the Malian crisis, which may have a strong consequence for all the region. We remain then politically, the EU, engaged, and we provide assistance not only to strengthen governance and security, but also to support basic social services, food security, job creation, girls' access to education, and to fight sexual and gender-based violence. The EU and the United Nations have indeed built a strong partnership in this region, as well as many others. I must recall the EU-UN joint visit to Chad, Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria in 2019. This visit allowed SSRG Chambas, SSRG Falls, and myself to conclude that short-term humanitarian and security actions are important to ensure peace and to cover immediate needs, but they have to go hand in hand with long-term development measures which addresses the root causes of the situation. Between 2014 and 2019, the EU alone has mobilized 700 million euros in the Lake Chad region through instruments such as the European Development Fund, the instrument contributing to stability and peace, or the EU Trust Fund window for the Sahel and Lake Chad. The EU strategic integrated approach, in line with what has been explained actually by Ambassador Nuhu, is exemplified in both the Borno package and the later, the Yobe package, which accounts for 245 million euros and make effective the humanitarian development peace nexus. This nexus is fundamental, of course. We had security and development, but we also need humanitarian aspects as a part of this more complex nexus. Specific projects such as Fond Chad and Secure Chad also contribute to the stabilization of the region, for instance, through improving the governance and capacity of security forces and their relationship with the population. Setting aside economic contribution, the EU continues to support regional initiatives, recognizing that not only a regionally coordinated approach can durably tackle security challenges and avoid a mere displacement of the threat. As your excellencies know, the EU participated in the Lakchet Basin Governance Forum in Maiduguri in Nigeria in 2018 and in Niamey, Niger 2019. We look forward to the following meeting to continue the discussion, which should take place, I think, in Cameroon. Additionally, the EU reiterates the leadership of the 4 riparian countries and the African Union encourages the implementation of the regional stabilization strategy. More recently, the COVID-19 pandemic is certainly having an effect on the region, adding new challenges to the current crisis in a number of aspects. And I will try to quote 3 elements or 3 aspects. Firstly, authorities have had to take measures to contain the virus, which includes movement restriction and constraint of transport and logistics. But as a consequence, vulnerable groups are suffering the most, as humanitarian aid and regular supplies cannot get through to them as they did before. And refugees and asylum seekers may not be able, unfortunately, to move safely and risk stigmatization. Secondly, the second element, the pandemic further threatens the life of 4.8 million displaced people in the region, hosted in Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria, as refugee, internal displaced persons, returnees, and third countries' nationals. Health facilities are overstretched and equipment is lacking. COVID-19 is yet another problem to add to the precarious situation in congested camps and settlements, as we observed very clearly when we made our field trip on the ground. How strong are the difficulties that they have to face? Team Europe has reacted quickly by mobilizing 200 million euros in the 4 riparian countries. As a complement to the United Nations Global Humanitarian Response Plan, an EU humanitarian air bridge was set up in Chad and Nigeria. In Nigeria, the EU has mobilized 50 million euros to support the UN Development Program, 1 UN basket fund, and close to 10 million euros to support a response to COVID-19. In Chad, the EU has pledged 34.42 million euros to counter the effects of the pandemic. In Cameroon, 10.8 million euros will address both the health response and the socioeconomic consequences of the COVID-19. Finally, in Niger, the EU is supporting the emergency health services response with 8 million euros, which are to be added to the 87 million euros allocated to respond to the macroeconomic impact of the pandemic, mainly through budget support. Third element or third aspect I would like to highlight, and it has been said very widely actually by all my predecessor participants. Terrorists and armed groups, of course, are profiting of the situation by increasing the number of attacks on military forces and civilian population, including deliberate attacks on aid workers. To be specific, during the month of July, incidents provoked by Boko Haram have increased 112% by comparison to the same period last year. To illustrate the gravity of the situation, IOM indicates that over half of the population in the Chadian Lake province is currently displaced. As a consequence, providing humanitarian aid is becoming, unfortunately, more and more difficult. On the security side, I would like to highlight that the EU continues to support the multinational joint task force and the strengthening of the civil-military coordination. We stress the importance of advocating for improved access for aid workers and respect for humanitarian principles and international humanitarian law. And as Dr. Chambers said very accurately, the respect of human rights. To conclude, Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic is having both direct and indirect effect on the Lake Chad Basin crisis. The EU remains engaged in the region and will continue to support the affected countries together with the United Nations efforts. That's why this meeting today is very important. That's why one of the main challenges I always say is the coordination. And that's why I thank you very much for having this meeting today. And I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Great to hear from you and very, very much appreciated. We are going to turn now to Dr. Fatima Akilu is the executive director of the Neem Foundation, which is based in Nigeria, deals with many of these issues in the northeastern part of that country, as well as in the Lake Chad Basin generally. So, Dr. Akilu, we're in your hands.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, members of the Peace Commission, representatives of the UN, AU, and EU, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me to give a few remarks in this very important meeting. As the only member of the NGO addressing you today, I hope that I'd be able to give you some insight on the challenges and opportunities we see in the ground as we carry out our work, and also what changes the COVID-19 pandemic has wrought. The organization that I represent is called Neem Foundation. It is a non-for-profit, non-governmental organization, which was started about 4 years ago. And it's
Fatima,
committed.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we can hear you, but we can't see you. Do you want to be seen?
I don't mind.
Is your camera on? There, good.
Is that better?
All right, that's better, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So basically, Neem Foundation started about 4 years ago to support healing, stabilization, reintegration of individuals, groups, and communities that were directly affected by the conflict in the northeast of Nigeria at that time. The mandate that we had then was to build resilience, well-being, and capacity of communities across the country to adopt inclusive approaches to recovery from the effects of conflict and mitigate future crises. Our areas of expertise include psychological and psychosocial support, peace building services and social cohesion, education in emergencies, communications, advocacy, institutional capacity building, both qualitative and quantitative research, and reintegration. Our commitment was to produce and disseminate evidence-based research that also strengthened our work in developing policies to influence crisis response. We have since expanded to 9 states in Nigeria, the Lake Chad region, and across the Sahel. When we talk about the conflict in Nigeria, the Lake Chad, and across the Sahel, although we work with both men and women, we have seen that women and girls are disproportionately affected. Large numbers of them have been abducted by terrorists. We see huge amounts of them that have been sold into slavery. And they have been subject to gender-based violence, discrimination, stigma, and various forms of abuse when they return. A large majority of these girls in the conflict-affected regions are no longer able to access educational services. So these are sometimes girls that were in education that are now no longer able to continue their education. And also, they are already at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Access to livelihoods has been further truncated. We see a lot of women-headed households without access to livelihood opportunities at all, which has created unprecedented levels of poverty for children living in those households. Furthermore, we see dwindling health services or non-existent health services that are putting these women's health at risk. These include access to reproductive rights, trauma caused by gender-based violence, as well as huge amounts of malnutrition. Women also face greater attacks on their reputation, with their voices are often silenced. Many are not recognized or protected by the state, so they remain sandwiched between both state and non-state actors. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused increased disruption and significant access to already the limited resources available to these women. What we see with curfews and disruptions to their livelihood, lockdowns, is that access to already limited services have become very, very small. Similarly, we have seen a rise in gender-based violence against women at a time that most shelters have been closed. So I'd like to give a few examples of the changes that we have seen in the work that we do in the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have several programs on rehabilitation, reintegration, trauma support, peace building, early warning, and education. Rehabilitation and reintegration, we're responsible for reintegrating about 5,000 young people who have come out of conflict. So these are children who have been associated with armed groups and conflict, usually the armed group. We provide them with ideological reintegration, educational support, psychological services, and trauma support. Since the pandemic occurred, we are no longer able to provide access to services to all 5,000 people because we're not able to reach them. Some of the areas in the camps that they live in have now been locked down, which means that a lot of these people are without access to services at a time that we know that Boko Haram is recruiting actively within those camps. We also provide trauma support through a program that we call Counseling on Wheels to about 20,000 people a year. These are people in hard to reach communities that have all been affected by the insurgency. So they've either lost their livelihood, their homes, or loved ones and have high levels of trauma. These people receive no other trauma support aside from what we give. And since the pandemic, we're not able to reach the majority of those citizens. In our peace building work, we work with communities, providing dialogue to help them to reintegrate ex-members of Boko Haram. We have a lot of ex-members of Boko Haram that are coming back, especially after the fight within the leadership of ISWAP. There is a faction of ISWAP that was headed by Mama Nur, who executed, are now coming out of the group. So these people are coming out back into communities, and there is not sufficient capacity to work to really integrate these people back into communities at the best of times. With COVID-19, there's even fewer humanitarian workers that are working in those regions. So we find a lot of them have come back to those communities, and because this work is not able to be done, they have gone back to Sambisa Forest or gone back to different armed groups. So this has become a real problem. The early warning work that we've done, a lot of people are not able to leave their houses, so they're not able to report in the way that they did, and the committees that conduct the early response mechanisms are not able to meet, so therefore we're not able to flag when there's early warnings of radicalization or insurgency or conflict. So what has that meant for us? What that meant for us is that we have had to change the way that we work, and I think that's across most non-governmental organizations. We have now included technology into the way that we work. So we provide a lot of services using mobile technology, phones, and we have a lot of programs that are now done on the radio. While this has been good because it's increased our reach, a lot of people do not have access to technology of any kind. So they are totally without services. When you look at the budgetary allocation for the kinds of work that we do, it is often very difficult to realign it in an emergency. So it means that we cannot now use those funds to buy technology support to reach some communities. So they're left totally without support. So what I'd like to recommend is that we would need to be, as going forward, more flexible in terms of funding. Funding for conflict kind of work should include more innovative approaches, including funding for technology. It should be long-term, and it should be based on research that should be evidence-based from the region. What we find is that though we've been working for many years and we're providing evidence, a lot of our best practices are not scaled up and are not used widely. So we are continually given, led to use research and programming from other countries that are not our own. There is also a danger of a shift in focus primarily away from violent extremism and conflict. We see that more and more. A lot of the funding is now shifting to a lot of conflict work is no longer covered. Many NGOs like mine have lost funding since the pandemic started. And finally, I'd like to see that responses to become less disjointed, less ad hoc, and with really greater reach. Because what we find is that a lot of us are doing work that is not joined up, little work in little places, but I think we need to be bolder, we need to be more imaginative, funding needs to be greater and more coordinated across the Sahel and West Africa. So thank you very much for asking me to make these brief remarks.
Thank you very much, Fatima. That's I think some very helpful analysis, but also some very helpful comments, particularly at the end about the need for us to be working better together. We're next going to hear from the UNDP, the Assistant Administrator, Ahuna Etsiakonwa. Ahuna? Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. And we can see you.
Wonderful.
All good. That's good.
Good morning, good afternoon. And let me start by congratulating you, Ambassador Ray, for your position in the chair of this August all-important body. Warm welcome to the chair, and to thank you very much for giving us, UNDP, the opportunity to make some comments. I want to stand by all protocol already observed in the interest of time and say just a warm greeting to a lot of familiar faces. I am hopeful, given all that we've heard so far, that our reflections will open the door to enhance our collective action on the peace, security, and development nexus in this very troubled region. One thing is clear, Mr. Chair, we will not be able to sustain peace if we do not prioritize the antidote to insecurity. We must invest aggressively in development to make more visible the alternative pathway for empowered lives and livelihoods. COVID-19 creates an even stronger sense of urgency for this approach. My briefing will focus on 3 key points, all of them put in much sharper focus because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The first one is that UNDP's experience with the Lake Chad Basin facility, stabilization facility, shows that stabilization actually works and needs more consistent financial support. The second one is that regional approaches matter. The centrality of local governance and the community engagement in restoring livelihoods and building their resilience. It's also very important, particularly in the cross-border zones. And thirdly, is sustainable financing requires a nexus DNA, and I'll explain. Already very eloquent presentations have laid out the fact that the situation in the region is worsening. So I need not repeat that, but let me just give by one illustration. Let's just take one of the 4 countries, Niger. Sandwiched between the Lake Chad and Liptaka Gumer, this country faces unprecedented slide towards fragility and insecurity with the intensified and more brutal attacks of non-state actors, non-state groups, a new wave of massive displacement from ongoing heavy floods, food crisis that has deepened with an increase of 77% insecurity since the last season, coupled with ongoing COVID-19 and upcoming very difficult electoral season. But as development actors, Mr. Chair, we are resilient and opportunistic, and we see opportunities within this crisis. Stabilization at national and regional level remains our best and most viable option in the conflict-affected zones. Stabilization does work, but must be sustainably funded. Addressing root causes in the Lake Chad Basin requires strong investments in stabilization to lay the foundation for recovery in conflict-prone communities. Even before COVID-19, in September 2019, UNDP stepped up action with the Lake Chad Basin Commission, and great to see Ambassador Nuhu here, as well as the African Union in the lead to establish the Regional Stabilization Facility for the Lake Chad Basin. We find that it works in restoring state authority, such as the police and the courts, providing basic services and opportunities for livelihoods, such as ensuring learning continues for the children, but also restoring markets, and all of these are showing positive results. Local communities are embracing these initiatives, which is important also for social cohesion. So in our view, stabilization, if sustained, has the potential to strengthen social contracts between state and society, to build social capital, between communities of different groups and to enhance social cohesion, which is desperately needed in the region. In this regard, the Peace Building Fund, which has been deployed in robust ways to the region, to the country teams in the different countries, has been critical in generating important lessons and establishing success criteria on how we operate in such a complex environment. And the fund has also been remarkable in helping the UN system work as one with a cross-border lens. And I'm sure we'll hear from my colleague Oscar later on this. Effective COVID-19 responses require evidence-based approaches. Working with the LCBC AU as well as the other partners, UNDP conducted a situational brief series on the impact of COVID-19 on the Lake Chad Basin in the areas of governance outcomes, community resilience, youth, women, and girls, sexual and gender-based violence as well. The results of this work continue to inform our program approach to ensure we are not missing new dynamics on pandemic effect. We must, the second point I have to make is that we must involve the local leadership and communities and let them lead in rebuilding their communities. COVID-19 responses and growing insecurity since March 2020 have further disrupted access to sustainable livelihood opportunities for Boko Haram affected communities, especially for pastoralists and regional livestock trade and markets. Responses to such a crisis must reach and touch the people directly to de-escalate complex spillover effects. UNDP is letting local communities lead in infrastructure and service provision to strengthen social cohesion. This inclusive approach, involving local communities in rehabilitating their infrastructure and basic services, create jobs, giving local economies a boost. Some of the infrastructure under construction includes, for instance, water lines and solar water wells, markets, schools, IDP camps, and border posts. Prioritizing gender equal responses is also being emphasized in this approach. In this, we see a key role for governors and local leaders. As such, we are pleased to continue to support the functioning of the Governance Forum, which brings together 8 governors from the affected zones across the 4 countries to exchange experiences and shape regional solutions. This approach must continue. UNDP, through its accelerator labs, is facilitating a deeper dive into what enables effective local governance that cuts across political, social, natural resource, as well as economic governance, employing enablers like digital technology and innovation. Third and lastly, sustaining financing requires a nexus DNA. Maintaining peace-building gains requires a commonality in purpose that must be accompanied by how the international community funds all elements of the nexus. We should talk about and finance traditional peace-building areas such as transitional justice, security sector reform, with the same zeal as we do youth and women empowerment, climate change, induced tensions, stabilization, and other social cohesion activities. Similarly, we must look at cooperation beyond the military to include police and other security sector entities, development, as well as diplomatic and humanitarian collaboration. To do this well, we need a long-term commitment, both from the LCB countries and the Commission itself and all international partners. Financing COVID-19 socioeconomic recovery in the LCB region gives us an opportunity to act on this nexus. Investing in core enablers like digital technology for e-governance, energy, particularly renewable energy, and other local priorities should be prioritized. Similarly, using social protection resources to resuscitate local small and medium enterprises and the informal sector should be emphasized. Some of the initiatives UNDP has supported on the recovery include the following: the provision of pro-poor palliatives, such as deferrals of utility payment in Cameroon, slashing off and deferral of tax payment in Chad and Niger, and decongestion of prisons and release of contingency funds in Nigeria. However, with the current financing gap of almost 30 million USD, sustainability of the facility is threatened. And I want to here recognize the donors that have so far supported the facility on stabilization, the governments of Germany, of Sweden, of the Netherlands, but also the European Union and the government of the United Kingdom. Partners also we will welcome continually showing flexibility to avoid weakening peace-building gains. Repurposing funds to support effective responses has also helped UNDP to implement cash for work initiatives in Cameroon, for instance, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, and to decongest and expand IDP camps in Borno State in Nigeria. Such flexibility should definitely continue. Finally, Mr. Chair, long-term and robust financing for development pillars outlined in the LCBC plan is the only way to protect the future and to also ensure that all our investments today can be protected going forward. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahuna. And our final briefer will be the ASG for Peace Building Support, Oscar Fernandez Taranco. Oscar.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ray. A very warm welcome to you. This is the first time we meet.
Thank you.
What has been, I think, one of the most substantive and very engaging briefings of sorts of the PBC, which really shows how far and how quickly this mechanism, this intergovernmental platform, is really proving its relevance and uniqueness. So a warm welcome to you. Also, as my many friends and colleagues who spoke before me, let me just say all protocols observed. So in the interest of time, to plunge in directly into the substance of today's meeting. So again, let me just assure you that I speak on behalf of everyone in the UN system when we say that we really look forward to supporting the work of this commission under your leadership, Ambassador Ray, and we look forward to coordinating the work for what is left of the year. Also take this opportunity to thank today's briefers, the many good friends and colleagues, and to highlight the importance of bringing the field perspectives into light on this very challenging region and its overlapping humanitarian, human rights, development, security, peace-building challenges that have been made even more so by the pandemic. Today's briefers have painted a very vivid picture of the impact of COVID-19 across the region and the efforts of national governments, regional partners, and donors to step up their efforts under increasingly difficult circumstances. As outlined during the ongoing 2020 review of the peace-building architecture and in the Secretary General's report on peace-building and sustaining peace that was issued last Friday, we cannot overstress, and I think many of the briefers alluded to that today, we cannot overstress the need for integrated approaches that bring together humanitarian, development, and peace-building actors in regions such as the Lake Chad Basin. This was always true and is even more true in the face of the pandemic, where, as the Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission also pointed out, a collective and coordinated effort by member states, international, regional, and sub-regional organizations, international financial institutions, civil society, and the private sector is required to fully realize the African Union LCBC strategy for the stabilization, recovery, and resilience of the Boko Haram affected areas. The PBC serves as this unique role with its ability to convene a wide array of actors and partners to help sustain the political attention and engagement and common approach required by all of us. I would like to note that this meeting coincides with an independent review of the PBC gender strategy adopted by the Commission in 2016. The Commission has, during the past years, amplified the voices of women peace builders in the field, and we must continue to strengthen its role in this regard, particularly now when we see women's rights being rolled back in some countries and women suffering disproportionately from the impact of COVID-19. PBSO, DPPA stands ready to support these efforts in close collaboration with the many field colleagues and partners that are present here today. We heard today from Dr. Akilu of the dangerous challenges facing women and girls in the Lake Chad Basin, where they are overrepresented in the informal sector and less likely to benefit from COVID-19 support. Her observations actually echo women peace builders from other parts of the world who have during these past months shared similar concerns with the PBC, confirming firsthand the exacerbation of gender inequalities during the pandemic. We also heard from the Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin region describe the 9 pillars of the regional strategy for stabilization, recovery, and resilience. We believe this is an excellent roadmap around which the international community, the UN, and the many partners must get behind and support so that national regional ownership is actually materialized, and by leveraging our respective tools for maximum input, including follow-up meetings of this Peacebuilding Commission to ensure that we not only provide sustained political attention, but we're able to measure progress against the many objectives and to be able to see how much results and impacts are actually happening. We believe that it's equally important that the flexible, strategic, catalytic investments from the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund to support the efforts of our SRSGs, which were recently described, as well as the many country teams that Ahuna referred to, is particularly important to support the different components of this strategy and to actually tackle the sources of fragility and root causes of conflict. It is particularly notable that this PBC meeting is happening just ahead of next week's Security Council open debate that will be focusing on the humanitarian effects of environmental degradation and peace and security in the Lake Chad region basis. I think that the quality and the substance and the analysis that we heard today serve precisely this role of the advisory and bridging role of the Peacebuilding Commission to integrate the different perspectives coming from the different work across the pillars of the United Nations. Mr. Chair, over the past several years, the Peacebuilding Fund has made many catalytic investments in the Lake Chad Basin. My UN colleagues have been very eloquent in describing many of these efforts, so I will not dwell more other than to say that this region does represent a priority for the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund. We have allocated some 25% of our programming efforts over the past 3 years, representing some $137 million. Programs that basically are seeking to support the political dialogue, the inclusion dialogue, the consultation with local communities, particularly addressing resilient pastoralism and cross-border operation across the numerous countries that conform the Lake Chad Basin, and to focus on extending the presence of the state in the remote border regions and to ensure that we have increased collaboration, cross-border collaboration, as many of the SRSGs have alluded to. Lastly, Mr. Chair, let me just remind the members of the PBC and the many colleagues that on Friday morning, the Secretary General will present his 2020 report on peacebuilding and sustaining peace in a joint briefing to the General Assembly and the Security Council. This report will bring together the issues we are discussing today, and I strongly encourage all of you to attend and to share with us your observations on the report. At the center of the Secretary General's report is the message that more than ever, multidimensional, coordinated, and whole of society approaches are required to meet the complexest challenges of our time. And certainly the discussion today on the Lake Chad Basin has demonstrated the importance of this coherent, coordinated, complementary role between the different partners involved in supporting regional and national ownership. I think it's extremely important to acknowledge how far and how much we have moved since the original 2005 vision for peace building, and as well as the implementation of the many recommendations of the twin 2016 resolutions. We are today, I believe, working much better together, and we relied on this continued commitment of the member states to enhance coherence, including through the work of this Peace Building Commission. There's been a lot of progress, and yet, as ASG Ahuna was also inferring in her presentation, financing for peace building remains a critical challenge. It is here that we depend on the commitment and resolve of member states to ensure that adequate and predictable financing for peace building in full complementarity with support of humanitarian development and human rights efforts as we seek to build stronger and more resilient societies in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. So to end, I just look forward to seeing you and hearing your feedback on how we can together further advance peace building and sustaining peace at the Secretary General's briefing this coming Friday. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and again, congratulations for your appointment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you to all the briefers who've, I think, given us a very good overview of what is an extremely challenging situation, but at the same time, I think there's a commonality to the approaches that are being recommended to us, which is important for all of our countries and groups to appreciate the need for greater integration, the need for people to coordinate what they're doing, and the need for sustained funding that does not rely on what I sometimes call the boutique approach to national funding of projects, which is never long-lasting and doesn't really help us to get to where we need to get to. Very much appreciate these interventions, and I will now go down the list. Through the miracle of technology, I've been advised at the top of the list. I'll go through the next 4 or 5 speakers. It's Omar Halali from Morocco, the Swedish ambassador, Anna Karen Enestrom, the chargé from Chad, Mukhtar Abakar, Kenya chargé Susan Mwangi, and then we'll go on from there. So I'll take those first 4 and ask you to keep it to 3 minutes, please, because we do have a bit of a list. So Omar, you're first.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et bienvenue.
Je vous en prie, mon ami.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before delivering into my intervention, I wish to heartily welcome the Honorable Bob Bry in our family. We are in very good hands with you. We particularly thank you, Chair, for organizing this important meeting focusing on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Lake Chad Basin, as well as all the previous eminent speakers for their very informative briefings. Mr. Chair, all the previous meetings of the Peace Building Commission highlighted the various adverse and specific effects of the COVID-19 on many regions of the world. This is all more the case for the Lake Chad Basin, where a set of pre-existing and emerging threats continue to affect the sub-region simultaneously to the exacerbating strains of the COVID-19. Indeed, the countries of the region currently battle several fronts, which are a global economic shutdown, climate change related to issues and the continued shrinking of the Lake Chad, a set of restrictive containment measures, last but not least, an ever pervasive terrorist threats. The damaging potential of these combined factors on the sub-regional peace, security, and stability constitutes regrettably a real concern and risks reversing decade-long peace building and sustaining peace efforts, as well as hampering the realization of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The socio-economic development of the countries of the sub-region is also paramount and cannot be overshadowed by the pandemic. Mr. Chair, we have heard indeed very instructive briefings from the field today and from the regional countries who have demonstrated strategic results to address instability and to strengthen their coordination. My delegation wishes to commend their continued regional cooperation. Preserving ongoing peace building and strengthening process in the Lake Chad Basin is our shared responsibility. In this regard, I wish to call on the international community to further support the ongoing peace building and sustaining peace process in the Lake Chad Basin. The PBC has continuously played a significant part in trying to shed light on the consequences of the pandemic in peace building context and in Africa in particular. This pioneering role of our commission can further mobilize support to help countries in the Lake Chad Basin fight violent extremism and discuss immediate and long-term socio-economic challenges with key international partners, including regional organizations. We commend the work of the Peace Building Fund and its contribution to the prevention of violent extremism, as well as the strengthening of key peace buildings areas such as women and youth empowerment and of local governance and social cohesion in the region of the Lake Chad. Finally, Morocco remains committed to the peace, security, and stability of the countries of the Lake Chad Basin, and to boost its bilateral cooperation and diversified cooperation to all areas of mutual interest, including to fight the scourge of violent extremism. It is worth noting that upon the very high and selection of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, Morocco proceeded to the sending as early as June of essential protective medical aid, equipment, and medicines to several African sister countries, including Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Burkina Faso, in support of their fight against the pandemic. I thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Omar, for that presentation. Now, Anna from Sweden.
Thank you so much, Chair and Bob. I'd like to welcome you as our chair of the Peace Building Commission, and I certainly look forward to working closely with you. Can I also thank you and the organizers for bringing together such a broad range of briefers, and I'd like to thank each and every one of them for their updates. I would also like to say that Sweden, of course, aligns itself with the statement made by the special representative of the European Union, and I strongly agree with what he said about the importance of the partnership between the European Union and the United Nations. I'd just like to make a few points. I mean, first to say that and agree to that the impact of the pandemic constitute a threat multiplier that has already reversed some of the hard-won peace-building gains that we have seen. I totally agree with everyone that has pointed to that the pandemic has deepened the root causes of fragility and conflict in many areas, and of course this is the reality in the Lake Chad Basin. Secondly, to emphasize that regional cooperation, as we have heard, is of course key to overcome these challenges. And Sweden is a strong supporter of the Lake Chad Basin Commission and in particular its regional stability strategy, to which we have contributed with some $8 million US. Thirdly, we commend the sub-regional, regional and international efforts being undertaken to mitigate the consequences of the Boko Haram insurgency. At the same time, we strongly agree with others and continue to be deeply concerned at the alarming scale of the humanitarian crisis, exacerbated by the pandemic. Human rights, democracy, and the rule of law must not become the casualty of the pandemic. And fourth, the effect of climate change has been mentioned by several, and its link to stability and security are evident. There is a continued need for improved risk assessments and risk management strategy by the United Nations, as outlined in the Security Council Resolution 2349. The Council must remain alert to the threats to stability from devastating effects of climate change. We strongly welcome the open debate in the Security Council in 2 weeks' time. And fifth, from the outset, women have been on the front line of the pandemic as responders, as caregivers, and as leaders in their communities. At the same time, increased abuse and sexual and gender-based violence perpetrated against women and girls have followed. And I commend the work presented by Dr. Fatima Akilu to us today. We must all make sure that women are included in decision-making and that a gender lens and transformative approach is applied in all stages of peace building. And I welcome very much what Oscar Taranco said about the Peace Building Commission and the Peace Building Fund's role in this aspect, and the gender strategy that is now being developed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. And now the chargé from Chad, Mukhtar.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to join the previous speakers in congratulating you, Mr. President, on your appointment as permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations, and thanking you for organizing this meeting. I would also like to thank the eminent briefers for their insightful presentations. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, this informal meeting is timely because the countries of the Lake Chad Basin, like other countries in the world, are currently suffering from the multiple impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, severely affecting all sectors of life. In my country, Chad, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated an already fragile socioeconomic situation. The health crisis has added additional pressure on the country's health system and has had serious socioeconomic and humanitarian consequences. Thus, national priorities were put upside down, and the limited state resources had been redirected to meet the needs of health emergency, humanitarian priorities, and socioeconomic response to this crisis. As a consequence of COVID-19, the growth rate for this year has been revised downwards. The budget deficit has widened. Several 100,000 of workers found themselves in a situation of technical unemployment, and the well-being of households has been affected, as well as the capacity of the government to implement the development actions are being affected. For 2021, the outlook looks even grimmer. With regard to the situation in the Lake Chad region, it is concerning, especially since this region has been experiencing for several years the combined effects of insecurity caused by the terrorist attack of Boko Haram and the effects of climate degradation. The civilian populations, who are the main victims, are pushed into forced displacement. The number of internally displaced people has continued to increase. In this context, the pandemic has come to exacerbate an already dire humanitarian, socioeconomic, and security situation. Furthermore, the heavy rainfall recorded this year in Chad in general, in the Lake Chad region in particular, has caused flooding, forcing thousands of additional people to leave their village, including women, children, and other vulnerable groups. On the security front, the overall situation is well under control by the government, but the terrorists continue to attack. Thus, on March 23rd, 2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Boko Haram carried out a vicious attack against the Chadian Defense and Security Force in Boma. The government took action to clear the island of the Lake Chad of elements of Boko Haram. The Chadian government remains more than ever determined in its fight against terrorism until security is finally restored in the affected area. With regard to the needs in the region in terms of peace building in the context of COVID, my delegation shares the views developed by the Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, Ambassador Mamad Nuhum. With regard to Chad, I want to point out the necessity for enhanced support for the anti-COVID-19 health response and measures to mitigate the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19, put in place by the government. There is also the need for continued additional resource mobilization for emergency humanitarian aid to continue to provide for displaced people, refugees, and also flood victims. The government is also implementing many development actions in favor of the Lake Chad region, including through the National Development Plan. All these actions need the continued support of our partners for their implementation. In addition, there is a need for continued intervention through projects in favor of youth, women, and vulnerable groups to reinforce the resilience of local communities. Finally, I would like to thank all the partners for the significant resource and sustained effort mobilized to provide support and comfort for the people of Lake Chad. I would also like to commend the important work the Peace Building Commission is doing in galvanizing efforts for sustaining peace. The invaluable intervention of the Peace Building Fund in Chad through the financing of many projects is highly appreciated by the government of Chad as well as by the beneficiary populations. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mukhtar, for that presentation. It's so important to hear from you and from your country, because after all, you are so significantly affected by what's taking place. I've got some other people that are on the list. Sharjah from Kenya, Susan Mwangi.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I join other delegations in welcoming you, Ambassador Bob Ray, to the Peace Building Commission, and to assure you of Kenya's continued constructive engagement in support of your chairmanship. Indeed, addressing the impact of pandemics, including COVID-19, can never be a national endeavor. We thank all the briefers for their very informative briefings. They have highlighted that the issues are multifaceted, cross-cutting, and cross-border in nature. Consequently, not only is a regional approach important, but of necessity are consultations with regional bodies and the respective neighboring countries. The PBC is particularly well suited to highlight these local and regional mitigation measures, particularly where the pandemic is impacting peace and peace-building processes. In this regard, my delegation welcomes all the representatives of the regional economic communities, regional mechanisms, and the civil societies here this morning. They have indeed contextualized and situated the peace-building priorities that need to be considered in the context of the pandemic in the Lake Chad Basin. And you've also drawn our attention to the persistent challenges that impact the environmental, humanitarian, and development sectors. Mr. Chair, given the important briefings and cross-cutting recommendations we have had this morning, we hope that these action points will form the core messages that the Commission will table before the Council during the 17th September Security Council open debate organized by Niger that will touch on the humanitarian and environmental challenges in the region. It is through such targeted country and regional briefings by the PBC that the Council will continue to meaningfully mainstream these emerging challenges to peace into the Council's work, and in this case, reinforce the implementation of resolutions such as 2349 on the Lake Chad Basin. That said, Mr. Chair, allow me to make some free observations and recommendations. One, the mitigation measures need to address the whole of society. Like most regions, the Lake Chad Basin is dealing with a pandemic within a multiple crisis environment. Additionally, the pandemic is having a disproportionate impact on various sectors of the societies, including women, children, both young, boys and girls, refugees, IDPs, not to mention the impact on farmers and pastoralists, who are already dealing with the challenges of desertification, drought, and water scarcity. As we deal with health security, we must also ensure socioeconomic security across the board, and the responses must also be age and gender sensitive. Two, partnerships for peace building that reinforce, not duplicate regional initiatives are also critical. My delegation wishes to commend the existing partnerships between the African Union Commission with the Lake Chad Basin Commission, the LCBC, that is geared towards regional stabilization, recovery, and resilience, the RSS, in order to comprehensively respond to the multi-layered challenges in the Lake Chad Basin region, including the threat posed by Boko Haram. The RSS and the Multinational Joint Task Force Against Boko Haram, the MNJTF, are good examples of best practices in partnership for the connect and combine the networks, capabilities and resources of the local, sub-regional and multilateral governance mechanisms within a shared socio-ecological system. The PBC is well suited to support this and other regional initiatives by highlighting their respective peace-building outcomes and through targeted investments, particularly during the implementation phases in their modalities of work. Thirdly, and related to the issue of partnerships, is the need for synergies and complementarity, as we've heard this morning. Similar to the situation in the Lake region, in the Great Lakes region and the Manu River Basin, threats to peace and peace building have demonstrated a tendency to spill across borders, with the impacts experienced in more than one country. In addition to regional approaches to address peace building efforts, there is need for mechanisms and commitments that reinforce synergies and complementarities between partners and different stakeholders. Synergies not only contribute to the coherence, but also are cost effective. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, Kenya welcomes the continued collaboration and engagement between PBC and the regional and sub-regional organizations in the Lake Chad Basin through field visits, consultations with the national authorities in the region, the convening of thematic and regional discussions like we're having this morning, and the projects facilitated through the United Nations Secretary General's Peace Building Fund. We hope that during the meeting on Lake Chad Basin, we will get to hear more on the specifics of these projects, such as the Youth Promotion Initiative project in the south of Chad that embodies a multi-stakeholder and whole of society approach in national peace conciliation. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is I'll list out the next few because I don't like people to be surprised. Fatima Mohammed from the AU will be next. Catherine Adida from Nigeria, Tom Woodruff from the UK, Hiroki Namatsu from Japan, Terj Aliyev from Norway, Matthias Lickartz from Germany, Shiraz Ghazri from France, and Ashish Sharma from India. Those are the names I now have. That should conclude the list. So try to keep your 3 minutes. Hate to be a bully, but I'm afraid we have to keep our eye on the clock a bit. So Fatima, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start first of all by welcoming you. I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, and in the interest of time, permit me to also stand on existing protocols. I'd like to thank the briefers. It's good to see so many familiar faces here today, and particularly recognize the comprehensive briefings that we've received on the developments of the Lake Chad Basin, and commend the governments of the region for their determination to remain focused despite the challenges posed by COVID-19, which is forcing us all to reassess our efforts in order to curb the spread of the pandemic. Like many countries throughout the world, as we've heard this morning, the global pandemic has substantially impacted on our social, economic developments, and particularly in the Lake Chad Basin, notably in the area of peace building. As we've heard today, the COVID-19 induced challenges risk exacerbating the pre-pandemic challenges and undermining progress that has already been made in many areas. It's clear that all these efforts must continue to be supported towards building and sustaining peace and achieving inclusive development in the region. Mr. Chair, permit me to recall that the Bureau of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union is fully mobilized in the fight against COVID-19. A number of practical steps have been taken to ensure a coordinated and multidimensional response to the pandemic, particularly in countries where, due to fragile socioeconomic and health systems, the pandemic is having a severe impact. Having heard today in great detail the impact of the virus on the various sectors, permit me to make the following 3 brief comments. First, on the political and security fronts. The impact of the pandemic is clearly profound, and it poses serious hurdles to peace, security, and stability in several regions in the country. The pandemic has introduced an additional layer of complication to the efforts of the AU, the regional economic communities, the UN, and other actors towards stabilizing the region through various interventions, including implementation of the mandate of the MNJTF against Boko Haram, as well as the regional stabilization strategy of the Lake Chad Basin region. And most importantly, as we've heard today, many of the gains made, particularly by local actors and community-based organizations and nonprofits, such as the one presented by Dr. Fatima Akilu this morning, clearly shows the importance for us to collectively step up our efforts to promote and support the stabilization of the region through, amongst other things, coordinated and coherent action. And most importantly, to ensure continuity to supporting local actors whose actions have a direct impact on communities. Secondly, as we're aware, women and youth continue to carry the heaviest burden of the protracted humanitarian crisis in the Lake Chad region. The gender inequalities, and particularly the impact on girls, is of great concern. Being someone from the region and having seen firsthand how these issues have, particularly with the displacement, has impacted the countries of the communities in the region. Issues such as lack of access to quality education, health services, and so on, really brings us to a point where we really have to reassess our efforts. And added to the significant challenges already in place, such as the congestion in internally displaced camps and lack of access to water and sanitation, communities now have to deal with the economic challenges caused by lockdowns, closures of schools, and this increases the burden of care for family members and disruption to household income. Thirdly, we have recognized that there's a strong correlation between sustaining peace and youth development. In a region where youth make up 65% of the population, we must continue to ensure that youth are provided the space to grow by providing opportunities for higher quality of life with better employment opportunities, greater access to education, and improved delivery of social services in order to contribute positively to the development of their communities. And finally, Mr. Chair, there is consensus that the socioeconomic consequences of COVID-19 would complicate and potentially erode peace-building gains in post-conflict settings such as the Lake Chad Basin region. In this regard, we reaffirm the African Union's commitment to partner with the Lake Chad Basin Commission and its member states, as well as ECAS, ECOWAS, the UN system, including the PBC, private sector, and civil society, to provide the required support to cushion the impact of the pandemic in the region. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Fatima. I look forward to an opportunity to meet with you to talk about these issues and others at greater length. Thank you so much. From Nigeria, Catherine Udida. Catherine.
Mr. Chair, let me at the onset thank you for convening this meeting and welcome you to New York.
Thank you.
My delegation assures you of our full support and cooperation as you steer the affairs of the Peace Building Commission. Allow me to equally thank all those who have shared their various perspectives on this very important subject. Mr. Chair, it is a known fact that the continuing devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the lives and livelihoods of people poses unprecedented challenges to developing countries and has fundamentally altered the prospects of achieving the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly in fragile and conflict states, especially those in the Lake Chad Basin area. The initial policy response adopted by governments to curtail the spread of the deadly virus, including immediate shutdowns of borders, affected the formal and informal sectors of all countries in the sub-region. It also exacerbated inequality and unemployment, as well as worsened the socio-political conditions of the poorest and the most vulnerable, thus leading to food insecurity and deeper socioeconomic crisis. The effects of the pandemic have been felt in the economy's revenues, investments, household incomes, financial markets, debt profile, and national budgets of countries in the Lake Chad Basin. The limits imposed on the movements of peacekeeping missions and other security forces in the area by the pandemic emboldened criminal elements to launch attacks on populations in vulnerable situations. It has also put on hold gains previously achieved through person-to-person reconciliation, dialogues, and workshops. Although the pandemic has led to horrific increase in violence against youth, women, and children, women are perhaps the most affected despite their unique contributions to the maintenance of the socioeconomic fabrics of the sub-region and prospects in the peace-building processes and architecture. In Nigeria, the COVID-19 shocks are multifaceted. The sharp decline in the international oil prices negatively impacted our domestic resource mobilization and economic growth, weakened the health system, increased the vulnerability of the banking sector, and inflicted enormous human and economic tolls on our citizens. Although the socioeconomic conditions of countries and people in the Lake Chad area have been significantly altered by the pandemic, it has also provided opportunities for the international community to support the efforts of governments in fragile and conflict regions to build back better in a way that promotes peaceful and inclusive societies and leave no one behind in this decade of action and delivery of sustainable development goals, especially Goal 16. We wish to seize this opportunity to welcome the support of the United Nations, international financial institutions, and member states who have made contributions towards mitigating the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Lake Chad sub-region. It is, however, our view that only a holistic and systematically harnessed and implemented approach can comprehensively address the multidimensional risks to peace endangered by the pandemic in the sub-region. In this regard, Nigeria calls for consideration to be given to outright debt cancellation, enhanced liquidity reprieve, and special drawing rights for countries in the Lake Chad sub-region. The current palliative funds and facilities from international organizations and financial institutions to states in the sub-region should be sustained in the short and medium terms, or as dictated by unfolding circumstances. This will not only help states in the area to gradually recover from economic slowdown occasioned by the pandemic, but also reduce conflicts induced by such vulnerabilities and weakened economies. In concluding, Mr. Chair, Nigeria will continue to promote cross-border dialogue with countries in the Lake Chad Basin Commission and strengthen strategies for preventing the outbreak of new conflicts in the sub-region. However, since no single country can confront this multifaceted problem alone, we urge the international community to work together in order to deliver on its promise of leaving no one behind as the world moves through and beyond the pandemic. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say, just editorially briefly, as co-chair of the Financing for Development, Friends of Financing Development, I'm very aware of the points you were making at the end about the linkages between what's happening as a result of COVID and the financial and economic situation they're facing so many countries in the world. So thank you for that reminder. Tom Woodruff from the UK.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And like others, I'd like to welcome you to the PBC and to say how much we look forward to working closely with you over the course of the months ahead. And I also want to thank you for convening such a substantial discussion today and for providing such a comprehensive set of briefings, and of course to thank those who provided them. I think, as others have said, I think this very much reflects the complexity and interrelatedness of the challenges and the issues under discussion today. Mr. Chair, I want to begin by reiterating that the United Kingdom condemns all attacks by terrorist groups, including Boko Haram and so-called Islamic State West Africa, in northeast Nigeria and across the Lake Chad Basin. And recent attacks against aid workers and humanitarian assets are deplorable. We encourage all parties to the conflict, including the Nigerian authorities, to work with the humanitarian community to facilitate safe, sustained, and unhindered humanitarian access to all those in need of assistance, in line with their obligations under international law. The UK is providing a comprehensive package of security, recovery, and stabilization assistance in Nigeria and across the Lake Chad Basin to help tackle the terrorist threat and support affected communities. We are partnering with the affected countries to stabilize the region and strengthen community resilience to tackle the underlying drivers of instability. Peace-building initiatives clearly have a role to play in those efforts to build resilience and lay the foundations for eventual sustainable recovery from conflict. But at the same time, we must acknowledge that in parts of the region, the conflict is ongoing and humanitarian needs remain acute. So, Mr. Chair, in that context, we are concerned by ongoing and increasing levels of food insecurity in parts of the Lake Chad Basin. As we've heard this morning, the most vulnerable people in the region are facing a perfect storm in which COVID-19 is compounding the impacts of conflict and climate change. Addressing acute hunger globally is a key commitment for the UK. And this is why we recently appointed the UK's first Special Envoy for Famine Prevention and Humanitarian Affairs and announced a $155 million package of UK aid for famine prevention efforts. This includes $10 million to support the work of the World Food Programme in northeast Nigeria. The United Kingdom is also particularly concerned about the potential impacts of COVID-19 on internally displaced persons in the region, including in ID camps and informal settlements where access to healthcare and clean water and sanitation is particularly challenging. Continued monitoring of the impact of COVID-19 on the security and humanitarian situation in the Lake Chad Basin is vital. All partners should ensure we are coordinating our response to the multiple challenges presented by the secondary impacts of COVID-19. We encourage the governments of the region to make full use of regional cooperation bodies to this end. Mr. Chair, I would just like to end with a word about the needs of women and girls in the region, as others have also highlighted this morning. Levels of sexual and gender-based violence in northeast Nigeria, already high before the pandemic, have increased. It is vital that the regional and international response to the pandemic is gender sensitive. And like others, we look forward to more detail on the gender strategy to which Oscar referred. The UK will launch new partnerships in northeast Nigeria in October to support implementation of the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, fund grassroots women's organizations, and enhance women's voices and influence in peace and security processes. And we urge all partners to consider how they can place the needs of women and girls at the center of their support for COVID-19 response efforts in the Lake Chad Basin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. We're next going to hear from the ambassador from Japan, Hiroyuki.
Yes, thank you. Let me begin by welcoming and thanking our chair, the permanent representative of Canada, His Excellency Ambassador Bob Ray, for convening this meeting. I also thank all the briefers for their informative and insightful presentations. I will go straight to discussing what Japan sees as important next steps. The core of success and at the same time the core challenge for bringing stability to the Lake Chad Basin is, we think, building reliable institutions at the local level. The current approach under the Regional Stabilization Facility focuses on strengthening and working with existing local authorities. The Regional Stabilization Strategy has identified the absence of governance in the affected borderland areas as a key issue to address. We recognize that working with existing authorities in the right approach in the short term, as our immediate priority is to mitigate the impact of the humanitarian crisis, including the COVID-19 pandemic. However, we also need to look beyond this approach to achieve long-term sustainability. Existing local authorities may be able to deliver some security and basic services to an extended area in the short term, but their capacities will be overstretched and limited. It will not be sustainable unless local capacities rooted in communities are created. There is no easy immediate solution to this challenge, but we need to take on the task of developing institutions in local communities where there is weak and non-existent governance. The key here is intensive investment in education and training for local populations, while the state and other local authorities have to maintain support to provide security and basic services. As such, communities are usually remote from the capital and other population centers in their country. Cross-border cooperation between communities may provide a solution to their capacity problems. Under its new approach for peace and stability in Africa, or NAPSA, Japan has focused its assistance to the Lake Chad Basin faced with consequences of climate change and violent extremism on supporting projects to enhance the capacities of institutions and individuals to ensure human security. For instance, we have supported projects to protect and empower vulnerable populations in affected local communities, particularly women and children, as well as internally displaced persons, through infrastructure development, livelihood support, and improvement of access to basic services, including health. Before closing, I would like to give special thanks to UNOCA and UNOAS, as well as UNDP and other UN agencies, funds, and programs for their active roles in engaging regional, national, and local partners to address the challenges in the Lake Chad Basin. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Hiroyuki. That was terrific. And now we hear from Norway.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations on taking up your role as Chair of the PBC, and a warm thank you to all the briefers today. Norway shares the deep concern about the deteriorating security situation that affects a growing number of people in the Lake Chad region. We are committed to continue to assist, including with humanitarian and development responses in the region. Norway is part of the newly established International Support Group, the ISG, for the AU Lake Chad Basin Commission Stabilization Plan for the Lake Chad region. During the first ISG meeting in July this year, we highlighted the need for an increased focus on addressing the consequences of COVID-19. The pandemic causes many negative effects, which we have heard many speakers elaborate on today. To our mind, there is a need for a better coordinated, more strategic response for the stabilization mechanisms, development and humanitarian assistance, including food security, and the COVID-19 responses. Further, it's crucial to get involved quickly with conflict prevention in the local communities. This work has been stalled by COVID-19, while the need for these types of efforts has increased. Finally, let me underline the vulnerability, especially for women and youth. Unfortunately, surveys show a dramatic increase in sexual and gender-based violence during the pandemic. We wish to underscore the importance of boosting our prevention efforts and strengthening our response, increasing access to reception centers, information, and awareness raising. Chair, let me once again thank you for convening us today and for a very timely and important meeting. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. From Germany, Matthias.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and also from my side, a warm welcome to the PBC. Needless to say that you have our full support. Thanks also to thanks to the briefers for their valuable insights, and also to colleagues. Colleagues have raised lots of points that I can now pick up and do not have to elaborate myself. But first of all, let me align to the statement made by the EU Special Representative for the Lake Chad Basin region, and let me come back to just a couple of points with regard to the challenges and the threats for the region. I think colleagues have and the briefers they have already said it also. I can refer to that. With regard to threats posed by terrorist groups, I can refer to what my British colleague has just said. And with regard to other threats as well, let me just say that given all these challenges that now have been aggravated by the pandemic, we need to step up our international support for the region, and in particular for the Lake Chad Basin Commission and the African Union. We would welcome additional donors joining the corresponding regional stabilization facility that is implemented by UNDP. At the same time, the food insecurity has reached unprecedented levels, and without additional funding, the WFP will have to suspend support to people facing hunger in the next weeks. So we commend the efforts by states to contain the spread of the pandemic, and we urge all actors to fully respect the humanitarian principles and the human rights when taking countermeasures. The unhindered humanitarian access must be guaranteed. With regard to the role of youth, I can refer to what Ambassador Fatima from the EU has said. So let me come back to gender. Here I would like to also refer to my Swedish colleague. And I think once more that it's clear that women are disproportionately affected by the consequences of the pandemic, including through an increase in sexual and gender-based violence. At the same time, women play a crucial role, not only in mitigating the impact of the health crisis. The full, effective and equal participation of women substantially increases also the chances for sustainable peace and stability. The gender perspective and gender-sensitive approaches must therefore be a prerequisite for all peace-building activities. Many colleagues have mentioned the nexus of climate and security, and I would like also to echo this. The Lake Chad Basin is one of the regions where the nexus between climate and security is most obvious. In July, under the German presidency of the Security Council, we heard a very impressive and at the same time very alarming briefing by Hindu Ibrahim, an environmental activist from Chad, who shared her own experiences and described the impact of climate change on security and the livelihood of local communities. She was very clear. The effects of climate change deprive the people of their basis of existence. It causes and fuels conflict and intercommunal violence, and it creates a breeding ground for terrorists and violent extremists with their toxic ideologies and false promises. So here we would come back to the threats that we were and challenges that we were talking about, and we need the international attention for more action. Therefore, we will welcome that also the current presidency of the Security Council organizes an open debate next week on the humanitarian consequences of environmental degradation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. We'll now hear from Sheraz from France.
Bonjour à tous et merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Bienvenue à la PBC. Thank you to all briefers for their substantial presentation. I also would like to apologize for the absence of Ambassador Nicolas de Rivière, who is presently at the Security Council meeting on implementation of Resolution 2532 on the fight against COVID-19. And you know that in particular, this resolution called for greater cooperation at international, regional and national level in the fight against the pandemic. And it's particularly relevant to Lake Chad region, as many of the briefers have said earlier. I would like to make two comments. I hope to be as brief as possible. First is on the Lake Chad Basin neighboring countries. They are facing a humanitarian situation which is dire with the spread of the pandemic, but also alarming levels of food insecurity and huge challenges in terms of development and security because of Boko Haram and other terrorist groups. The region is also particularly affected by climate change and its consequences in terms of population displacement. We believe that continuous support to the multinational joint task force is key to stabilize the region. France welcomes the gains made by the Chadian troops against terrorist groups. We encourage Nigeria, whose role is essential, to deploy increased military efforts too. Only the restoration of security will make it possible to restart basic services, to restart the economy, and carry out long-term development actions. It's also crucial, as it was said just before me, to protect humanitarian workers and medical personnel and to ensure a safe, full and unhindered humanitarian access to all population in need. As others said, respect for international humanitarian law is non-negotiable. Second point, I would like to insist on the priority of the collective duty that we all have to help African countries tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. France has insisted on the need for coordinated international action to this end. We have been acting with partners in 3 directions. The first one is a consistent call to alleviate the weight of the debt burden for African countries. The second is our bilateral pledge to provide support for the fight against the pandemic in Africa with a funding of 1.2 billion euros together with our partners, notably the European Union, who has been speaking as a briefer. The third one is, of course, significant support to UN agencies and organizations involved in the COVID-19 response. Beyond the horizon of the pandemic, we also need to focus on the medium term, and that's what the PBC is about. Sustained efforts are needed on education, health, and on designing an economic response that is green, sustainable, and in line with the Paris Agreement and the Agenda 2030. Women and the youth have a major role to play, as it was said many times, and we call for their full, effective, and meaningful participation in all relevant processes. And we look forward to hearing from the women and youth directly in the PBC, as we have been hearing from them today among the briefers. We really believe that the portfolio of the Peace Building Fund is relevant to address these challenges in the Lake Chad Basin countries. To conclude, I would just like to recall our long-standing cooperation with the countries in the region. In Nigeria, we support projects to strengthen the resilience of communities affected by Boko Haram and COVID-19. In the Lake province, we also support education structure in the Wai and Kuludia departments and the Abba Kiari Hospital in Maiduguri, which is directly involved in the fight against pandemic, and we look forward to continue to do that in close cooperation with all relevant actors. And as this point was insisted on by many briefers today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiraz. Ashish Sharma from India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please allow me to congratulate you for assuming the chair of PBC and for organizing this meeting on the pressing subject. We also thank all the distinguished briefers for their insightful and comprehensive briefing. Mr. Chair, India has a long-standing and ever-expanding cooperation with African countries. Our partnership is focused on Africa-led and Africa-owned development, which is based on mutual respect, trust, equality, and solidarity. The model of our cooperation is demand-driven, consultative, and participative, focusing on building capacities in terms of skilled manpower and institutions involving local resources and traditional knowledge. Mr. Chair, we are extremely concerned with the ongoing humanitarian and peace-building challenges in the Lake Chad Basin region, which has been further aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Intensification of violence by extremist groups in the region is highly condemnable. Since the ongoing violence coupled with the pandemic is exacerbating the humanitarian crisis, it is important that the conflicting parties in the region immediately respond to the call of the chairperson of the African Union Commission to immediately stop the fighting and engage in dialogue. The pandemic has intensified the challenges faced by refugees and the IDPs. Reinforced regional and international cooperation is paramount to enable delivery of humanitarian assistance to this vulnerable section. We appreciate the increased engagement of UNOCA and UNOWAS with the Lake Chad Basin Commission to support local authorities in their efforts to tackle the pandemic. Lack of information and awareness about the pandemic is also a major challenge. Dissemination of timely, verified, and scientific information about the precautions, symptoms, and treatment among the communities living in the region should be a priority. At the same time, it is important to check spread of misinformation and rumors about the pandemic, which has the potential to create avoidable unrest among the communities. Mr. Chair, India calls for greater assistance to be provided by the international community to assist the region in overcoming the challenges posed by the pandemic. In the month of May, India has dispatched COVID relief medical supplies to the region to fight the pandemic. We are in constant touch with our African partners for ensuring further medical assistance. In line with our cooperative development model, India is also actively engaged with the region in areas such as agriculture and food processing, rural electrification and power transmission, low-cost housing, and resilient constructions and potable water. We have most recently funded a project in Kanem region and Lake Chad regions to reverse the cycle of land degradation by training 400 farmers in techniques to combat desertification. Mr. Chair, COVID-19 pandemic has posed severe challenges before the world in general and Lake Chad Basin region in particular. We call upon the international community to come together to support peace building activities in the region. My delegation is of firm belief that in order to achieve long-lasting peace and stability in the region, UN and regional organizations shall strive to provide an enabling environment to the competing parties to initiate dialogues and discussions for overcoming their conflicts. India supports international and regional cooperation with local ownership for implementation of humanitarian, developmental, and peace-building initiatives. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a moment from my chair duties to give you a brief national response. We appreciate very much what the briefers have had to say. I think it's fair to say that Canada's approach has been consistently supportive of the work of all the actors in the region. We've spent around $43 million last year, this year on our funding for development, for humanitarian assistance, and another $10 million is being dedicated to looking at the broader security concerns in the region. But I wouldn't pretend to say to you in my initial meeting that that is by any means enough. Before I came here, I wrote a report for the Government of Canada on humanitarian assistance and the impact of COVID on that, and as well as on the refugee situation around the world, and particularly in Africa. Like all of people who write reports, I'm waiting to see what the government's response to the report will be. But I'm hoping that it will be one that will result in additional funding for the humanitarian impact of COVID, which we recognize globally is significant, and particularly in this region is particularly significant. I was very impressed today by the way in which people came together on a number of issues to which Canada is very responsive. We believe powerfully in the need for us to address the role of women and to look at how we work through the gendered lens and through a lens that looks at the impact on the most vulnerable elements of the population, and also recognizes historically and around the world a very positive and incredibly constructive role that women are playing in the very nature of peace building, in creating dialogue, and in creating conversations that will lead to a better climate for peace. At the same time, we believe strongly that terrorism has to be not only resisted, but fought and defeated. But we know that we need to look and understand not only the nature of terrorism, but also to understand its causes and what more needs to be done to address those causes, and how I think the almost universal belief is that the way to address it is by cooperation between agencies, and in taking not only a strong approach of breaking down silos at the United Nations, but also figuring out ways in which countries can work more effectively together to coordinate their efforts. Speaking personally, I have to say that in Canada, the Great Lakes, we have our own Great Lakes, and we've had a Great Lakes Commission between Canada and the United States for over 100 years. And while it's obviously the product of a very different history and a very different geography and circumstance, the fact is that the creation of the Commission for Lake Chad is extremely significant. And I think we have to address the funding issues which have been posed to us very clearly by Ambassador Nuhu. It's very, very clear that COVID is having a dramatic impact on health, on the social and economic consequences of the battle against COVID, and now a liquidity crisis, which the representative from Chad referred to and which others have talked about as well. And these are things to which we all must respond, including my own country. And I look forward to further discussions with all of you about how we can proceed. On that score, I'd like to ask the briefers if they have any comments that they would like to make. Let me stress the word comments, not speeches, comments in response to the comments from a number of countries that have participated in this dialogue. So perhaps I could just ask if you can put up your hands, or I can ask you individually whether there's something that you would like to say. So going back to our list, I'll start at the back with Oscar. Oscar, do you have something you would like to comment on briefly?
Hello, Ambassador Ray. This is Barry Freeman, Oscar's deputy. Oscar had to leave for another meeting.
Okay,
So
Barry, you fill in.
Just on his behalf, just to thank everyone, and again, to welcome you. I think this was a really great meeting, and just to look forward to taking this forward. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much. Ahona, are you still there? No, Fatima. Oh, hell.
Yes, thank you. Thank
Hell,
you.
you're there. Okay, good.
Yes, I'm there, Bob. Thank you. And again, also congratulations to you again for taking over this office. I just wanted to add something, is that we are facing a very complicated moment now in all the region. We must look at what happened in Mali. We must look what happened, what we're going to have very soon, elections in Niger, in Burkina Faso. All these affected the whole region, and we must be very, very careful not to have this sort of circle of terrorism which goes from the Lake Chad up to almost to the coast. And of course, the pandemic is a good moment also for the terrorists to take action and to create chaos. That's what they like. And that's why it's very important that we keep very, very close and very coordinated all together. And I'm very happy that we have this strong coordination with the UN, between the EU and the UN and other partners. And also to Ambassador Nuhu, we have supported him. We have supported the joint task force from the beginning with financing the joint task force. We hope to continue in that same way. You know that the EU cannot finance lethal elements, but on the other hand, we are very conscious that we are facing a very important problem in the region, and the High Representative Borrell is very conscious of that. That's what I wanted to add, and we have to work all together with two elements which I said before, which are very important: coordination first, and also ownership. The ownership is something fundamental. That's what I wanted to add, and again to thank you for this invitation that I appreciate very much.
Thank you, Angel. So, Your Excellency, Manman Nuhu, do you have something to add?
Yes, just to say a very big thank you to all the briefers for those very important points raised in the course of the briefings. They are highly appreciated, and also the comments made by the excellencies, the ambassadors. I thank you also once again for the invitation and the opportunity given to the Lake Chad Basin Commission to make this brief presentation. I thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you again. Is either Monsieur Chamba or Monsieur Fall there? Mr. Chambas, are you there?
No. Hello, sir. Mr. Chair, Mr. Chambers has to leave for a meeting with the Nigerian authorities.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here. François Fall, I'm here.
Oh, Ambassador Fall, merci beaucoup.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. I just want to thank you for your leadership, and also to thank all the participants for the interest they have indicated today. Together, I think we will address together the challenges facing to the region of the Chad Basin. I want to thank you very much again for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Well, I thought I would just add a couple of points as chair. First of all, I want to thank all of you for your very kind greeting. I know that in succeeding Marc-André Blanchard, I have a big shoes to fill. And I appreciate very much your expressions of support. I think that the work of the Commission is really important because it reflects, I think, a view of the member states that we need to create some greater focus in the world, not simply on peacekeeping and on military interventions, which are required from time to time and are very necessary, but also to try to understand the underlying conditions that help us to build peaceful and more stable societies. This is not an easy thing to do. It's very challenging, but it requires a greater effort than ever before. The second comment I would make is, and I've said this in other contexts, I'll say it again, COVID is not a leveler. COVID is a revealer. COVID is a magnifier. It reveals inequalities. It reveals the challenges that the world faces, and it makes them clearer, and it makes them more serious, and it magnifies them. So what Angel said about what terrorists do is work on chaos. If COVID helps to create chaos, then they will take that and they will magnify their efforts, and they will magnify the problem. And I think it's important for us to understand the consequences of failure in not addressing these underlying issues and in not taking advantage, frankly, of the crisis of COVID to respond more effectively. I think there was very broad agreement from the presenters about the importance of an approach that focuses on the situation of women and girls and the impact that this is having on them in particular, and the need for us as donor countries, and the need also for all of the UN agencies to embrace the idea of the gender lens, which I think is such a critical approach for our countries to take. At the same time, I listened very carefully to what Fatima Mohammed said about the importance of understanding the demography of 65% of the population being young, and in particular, the challenge that is posed by younger men who have no work, who have nothing to do, and who are very prone to these messages of extremism and ultimately to the practice of terrorism. And so while we apply the gender lens, and we need to in terms of finding the solutions, we also need to understand the needs of younger men and the importance of addressing the situation that's facing them in terms of work and jobs, employment, opportunity, all of which requires investment, all of which requires stabilization, because without stabilization, we can't have even approaches to prosperity. And in particular, I want to say that my first briefing on the Lake Chad Basin, the first comprehensive conference that I've ever attended, the importance of understanding how all the issues that we talk about rhetorically, climate change, COVID-19, the crisis of underdevelopment and the challenges that are facing so many parts of the world, it comes together in very practical ways. We heard about a 50% budget cut. We've heard about an inability to deal with the underlying environmental impacts of what's happening to the lake itself. And then we find that there's so much more to do in the region altogether. I think it's been a very productive discussion. I know that I perhaps have learned more than all of you, but that's good. Learning never stops. But it's also important for us to respond to the messages with action. I think the messages are, we need to coordinate what we do. We need to be prepared to invest more. And we need to remind everyone of the consequences of not taking action, which I think we can all agree in this circumstance will be very serious. So thank you very, very much for the opportunity to be with you. And we will return to this subject. We will be following very closely the work of the Security Council and the discussions about Niger next week. And I, of course, will continue to work with all of you in representing the Commission in my temporary role as chair. But as my wife says, all these jobs are temporary, which is true. Thank you very much. Good to be with you. And thank you so much to all our briefers and all of you for attending and listening so carefully. Take care. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.